Hello, everyone. This is Roxy from the Beijing News. This year is quite special. It's not just a 20-year mark of 9/11 events, but with the recent withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, it also marks the end of a 20-year-old war.
What are the impacts of 9/11 on the U.S. or on the entire world? There are so many questions and so many perspectives that we could talk about. So, who want to be the first to bring up some questions or to deliver some insights?
I mean, the 9/11 was a watershed event, obviously, in U.S. national history and U.S. foreign policy. One could look at the effects in terms of the domestic effects. George W. Bush was the president at the time. He campaigned on being a realist, but 9/11 completely changed the direction of U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. would occupy Afghanistan for 20 years. The U.S. would go into Iraq and topple Saddam Hussein, again, in the name of sort of post 9/11 counterterrorism. The U.S. is basically rather continuously has had a military presence in that country. The terrorism threat has changed dramatically since 9/11. Al-Qaeda means the base. It was concentrated in Afghanistan under Operation Enduring Freedom, which was the U.S. military response to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The U.S. went in there and the terrorism threat metastasized. And so that would end up basically destroying the Al-Qaeda base, not removing it, but spreading it out to Al-Qaeda affiliates in a number of different countries and regions. The counterterrorism response changed, but the nature of the terrorism threat itself also changed in terms of Al-Qaeda being spread throughout the world.
I enjoy what Max just said. Let me tell you a personal story. I arrived in the United States for my graduate study on September 9th, 2001, just 2 days before 9/11. I still remember I was checking out my new student ID from a university library. I was at Northwestern, and I saw like quite a few people huddled together around a black and white television. There were two skyscrapers fuming out smoke. So I thought this was like a fire, a big fire somewhere in a skyscraper in New York. And then I said, no, this is okay. And then after I got my new library ID card, I went back to my rental apartment and I turned on the television. And then I realized this is not just a fire. So it's a terrorist attack. So that was 9/11. That's a kind of a life memory for me. Because of 9/11, and so you had the United States invasion of Afghanistan, and then occupation of Iraq, like Professor Abrahms just said, right? For me, I think 9/11 to Americans is much more a psychological warfare than a real battleground. I think it's kind of a dawning moment for Americans that America is not invulnerable. America is just as vulnerable as many other countries, but they used to think that, United States now stands at the pinnacle of its own power. This is a totally unipolar moment, but then suddenly big bang, 9/11, and you have this airplane crashing into the Twin Towers. So that kind of a psychological trauma, I would say, it still kind of echoes in many Americans' memories. Okay, this is my first point. Second, because of this terrorist attack, United States had its military presence in Afghanistan and Iraq, and so this brings back this Wilsonian impulse to change the world. Woodrow Wilson said, the world must be made safe for democracy. For many years, people forgot this. And then because of 9/11, I think many foreign policy thinkers and analysts, they pick up this Wilsonian refrain again and say, okay, we need to go outside the United States and search monsters to destroy. Even though John Quincy Adams, admonished Americans, United States should not go and search monsters to destroy overseas, right? So again, Bush and Obama and, to a much less extent, Donald Trump, they believe that it's incumbent for America to make the world safe for democracy. even though they don't use the word regime change. Okay. But what happens right now, of course, United States, its last troops have been pulled out of Afghanistan, and this has caused a huge controversy back in the United States about the competence of the Joe Biden administration, about the wisdom of announcing this.
Thank you so much. I agree with that. I think that's an excellent analysis. I think that that 9/11 was very humbling. Just to build on what you had to say there, it was humbling in terms of both areas that you're talking about, which is essentially how safe are Americans? That's point one. And the second point is, to what extent is the U.S. able to change the rest of the world? And I think that America, what we've seen really of late in terms of the Afghanistan withdrawal has more to do with the second point. I think that I always wonder, how much is Washington, D.C. going to learn? Because a lot of U.S. foreign policy, especially since 9/11, has been a real failure in terms of the Middle East and Muslim majority countries. The United States has made numerous really substantial foreign policy mistakes. And it seems to me that one of the very obvious takeaways is that nation building doesn't work very well, that the US should shy away from regime change, right? And that democracy promotion is very difficult and maybe, frankly, ill-advised.
And you guys talking about US foreign policies change after the 9/11 attacks, and I noticed that 9/11 actually affected domestic policy of US as well. I noticed the US national security apparatus transformed significantly, and some experts may worry it would create redundancies and granting sweeping powers for various agencies. How do you think the changes of the domestic policies of US against terrorism?
Now, many Americans, presidents, politicians, analysts, intellectuals, they are deeply concerned whenever the United States was involved in overseas expansion. The 1898 American-Spanish War and the First World War, Second World War, Vietnam War, because every time you have a war, that inevitably increases the federal government's power. Look at the Espionage Act, etc., the Sedition Act in the early days, and then look at FDR, his internment of the Japanese during the Second World War. So Americans always kind of skeptical about anything that would increase the federal government's power, especially at the expense of individual liberty. Now, coming back to this Department of Homeland Security and this increasing after 9/11, you have this mushrooming of federal agencies. And so a lot of complaints by Washington Post and New York Times that there's much surveillance about ordinary Americans, wiretapping, this violation of individual rights, etc. Right? But many Americans will celebrate this, so hopefully you would, tone down many of these federal agencies that are in charge of surveillance, eavesdropping. So that's my point. You have any war, counterterrorism, or just a conventional war. And that would always worry many Americans because they deeply believe that liberty at home is the ultimate goal and the most important goal of the American Republic. Anything that would threaten liberty at home, and they would ultimately, eventually, they would reflect and perhaps the backlash. I think, that's what happened during, I think in about midway between the Afghanistan war. And that is around 2010 something. Many Americans, analysts began to say, hey, wait a minute. Now, if this war on terrorism goes on, and that means that, Americans' individual liberties, civil liberties could be at jeopardy.